Hello, everyone. I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
I think we're just gonna skip the banter today because,
It's straight business today, my friends. It's
yeah, we've got one hell of a series coming up for you. So
that's right. We are going to be discussing someone who we've had a few of you ask us to cover, and the time has finally come. So before we even get into it, you wanted this.
yeah, you asked for this.
Yes, we've seen comments. I've gotten emails.
Yeah.
People are saying, "When are you going to cover this guy?" And I've been like, "When the time is right." And I guess that time is now.
I
But
guess.
woof.
So we're finally covering the one and only Albert Fish.
He was known by many names, including the Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Moon Maniac, and the Brooklyn Vampire. Many children who were unlucky enough to cross his path would even refer to him simply as the Boogeyman.
This is someone who a lot of you listening have probably already heard of because his brutal crimes have earned him a spot in true crime history. And some of you may even be familiar with his infamous X-ray photos.
We'll get to those later. I was like willfully just showing those to people at work.
I think it's because if you have seen them, and feel free to look them up, I warn you though, they are shocking.
Yeah.
They're just hard to wrap your head around. And
Yeah.
once you know what we're talking about, you'll understand why.
I'll post them on the socials. I'll ruin your day. I don't care.
Absolutely. Albert Fish was an American cannibal and serial killer with sadomasochistic and hedonistic tendencies.
We know for a fact that not only did he brutally kill 3 innocent children, but he also ate them too. Albert Fish is known for boasting that he, quote unquote, had children in every state, and also claimed that his victim count was around 100. And I want to interject really quickly by saying I don't believe he killed 100 children. However, he definitely victimized over 100 in some way or another.
I mean, even coming across him was bad enough, never mind what he did to some of his victims.
He really was the boogeyman.
He was the most perverse and depraved, sadomasochistic, cannibal child killer. You can't get much worse than that.
No, you can't.
That being said, we, of course, are going to warn you that this is going to be a pretty difficult series to listen into. The crimes of Albert Fish are shocking, even by today's standards. He really was a truly evil human being.
Not only did he take great pleasure in victimizing innocent children, he also tormented their families afterward with horrific details of his crimes. And this is someone, like, I will admit, he's been on our list for a long
I
time.
think,
We wanted to cover
honestly,
him.
yeah, he was one of the first when we first got together for the podcast and we were like, hey, who do we want to cover? Albert Fish was definitely up there.
Because we talk about serial killers, especially old-timey, and when it comes to old-timey serial killers, for me, it's always him and Carl Panzram.
Oh, absolutely.
He's who comes to mind for me when we talk about true evil personified. Because not only that, he was just an overall vile human being. When you hear about people calling him things like the boogeyman or a vampire, it seems extreme, but I'm sure by the end of the series, you're going to agree with those nicknames. This is a horrific story, and it is truly what nightmares are made out of.
Even when you try to look past his victims, which is extremely difficult to do, the stuff that he put himself through.
Yeah.
And I mean, hey, not kink shaming anyone.
No.
Whatever you want to do to yourself in the privacy of your home, eat your heart out. But this gets really, really, really weird.
You know, it's horrific, obviously, but the main word that kept coming up for me is gross.
Yeah, absolutely gross. I mean, we said in extra credit, actually, just gone past, we kind of gave you guys a clue, but we said he's just a walking, talking human ick, and
Yeah.
that's really it.
It goes without saying, but we want to state this episode, it's not going to be for all of you. There's going to be a lot of talk of sexual assault, cannibalism, and yes, the ingestion of both feces and urine.
It's going to get gross, it's going to get scary, and truly, truly horrifying.
Those of you familiar with the story, you know exactly what we're talking about.
Yes, we will be covering the Grace Bud letter in detail later.
I'm not looking forward to that, I'm not going to lie.
No, we'll cross that bridge when we come to
Yeah,
it.
sure.
Oh, Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the story of the horrific Albert Fish.
Hamilton Howard Fish was born on May 19th, 1870, to parents Randall and Ellen. At the time of his birth, his father was 75 years old, while his mother was 43 years younger.
Already off to a cracking good start.
We obviously talk about the childhoods of people we cover on a very regular basis in an effort to figure out how they went down the paths that led them to commit the crimes that they're known for. And in the case of Albert Fish, not only does it seem like he was essentially doomed from the start, but he really seemed to enjoy hurting other people from a very early age.
I think he's truly one of the best examples of a sociopath we've ever covered.
So, Hamilton, as he was first known, was the youngest of the family. His parents had three other children named Walter, Annie, and Edwin.
And if you're like us, you're probably wondering how we get from the name Hamilton to Albert.
Well, the Fish family had another son who had been named Albert, but sadly he had passed away. Hamilton decided that he wanted to be called Albert after his dead brother, as well as to escape bullying that he was enduring due to his name.
He was given the very creative nickname of Ham and Eggs, which apparently bothered him so much that from then on he decided that his name would be Albert Fish.
Hamilton is honestly one of my favorite names ever, so that makes me really
No,
sad.
it's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with Hamilton.
No, it's a great name. Ham and Eggs. That just doesn't seem that bad of an insult.
No, and I've heard some nicknames over the
Right?
years. So
Yeah. So I mean, to me, it's kind of weird that he went from that to being like, oh, I'm gonna change my name to the name of my dead brother.
I'm sure there's a lot more psychology behind that I am not nearly enough educated to discuss. But perhaps his parents liked Albert the First better.
I wouldn't fucking like this kid.
No, no, absolutely not. So, a large number of the Fish family had various issues with mental illness, and overall, family life was not pleasant by any means.
His father originally found work as a riverboat captain. However, in 1870, he began working in the fertilizer manufacturing industry. That, unfortunately for him, would not last long. In 1875, Randall Fish passed away of a heart attack while at a train station.
This truly devastated the family, especially Randall's wife. Shortly after the death of his father, Albert was placed in an orphanage, and this is where things would start to get really bad.
He began suffering extreme physical abuse from both those who were supposed to be taking care of him as well as other boys at the orphanage. This, of course, is a terrible thing and would affect many people. However, Albert realized around this time that he really enjoyed it when people inflicted physical pain onto him.
While he was being beaten, he would often develop erections, which, of course, the other boys noticed. They taunted him mercilessly for this.
4 years after the death of her husband, Albert's mother was able to get a decent job and support her children. It was around this time that he was taken out of the orphanage and began living with her once again. However, it seems like at this point it was too late for him to ever live a normal life.
At the age of 12, he began dating an older boy who introduced him to things such as, like mentioned before, drinking urine and eating feces. These were two activities that Albert particularly enjoyed.
I gotta say, I really tried to find out more information about this kid. I could not find anything about this boy, and I wonder what happened to him and like where he ended up. Because I mean,
Look where Albert ended up.
right?
And to have already, so if he was the boy who kind of showed Albert these things, although I don't have much doubt that Albert would have discovered these things himself eventually.
Oh yeah,
But if he was already at that state, yeah, where did he end up in life?
exactly. I mean, he could have even been a whole other serial killer that we just don't know about.
Absolutely.
And again, not saying. I mean, if you enjoy those things, I'm not gonna lie, you're a little weird in my eyes. But hey, whatever floats your boat. But you don't need to become a serial killer.
No, absolutely not. Now, back in those days, lots of people visited bathhouses, and Albert enjoyed frequenting such places. Of course, not so that he could have a nice bath, but so he could watch other boys and men undress. He would spend a lot of time at these places.
In 1890, Albert Fish moved to New York City. He almost immediately began working as a sex worker, and according to him, this was when he began sexually abusing young boys on a very, very regular basis. Although it's fair to believe that this behavior started much more before that.
At around the age of 18, Albert had a career change and began working as a house painter. One of the things that he enjoyed was the fact that he got to visit so many different places, often with young children present.
His victims were essentially everywhere, and he took full advantage of that.
He worked on people's homes, orphanages, schools, basically anywhere there was people, which was extremely dangerous for those he was around.
He would later say that his preference was boys under the age of 6.
Which, oh my god.
Yeah. So, famous true crime author Harold Schechter, he wrote a book about Albert Fish. It's called Depraved, which I think is,
Appropriate.
yeah, very appropriate. One of the things he talks about in the book was basically Albert Fish would show up to these houses and he would have like painter's overalls on,
Oh god.
but that's all he would wear. He would have nothing underneath. So he basically used
No.
these overalls for easy access. And he was able to take off his clothes very quickly, abuse somebody, put them back on, and then just continue on with his day. And listen, if you want to ruin your whole day, week, month, however long it takes you to read a book, I highly suggest this one because it will stay with you.
No kidding. Many of Albert's victims were African American, and he would frequent areas with a large black population because he knew that the police were not paying as much attention there. He chose his victims very specifically because he knew he would get in less trouble if he abused them and got caught.
A large majority of his young victims were also intellectually disabled. He chose them due to the fact that they were easier to groom and, in his words, more childlike.
So not only is he preying on children, but he is preying on the most vulnerable children he can possibly find.
He would openly admit in court later that he chose his victims based on the fact that they wouldn't be missed if something happened to them.
Fuck, that's heartbreaking.
Isn't that just awful?
In 1898, Albert Fish got married, which we are sure surprises all of you.
Let's talk a little bit about this marriage because you're probably all wondering how the heck this guy managed to find a wife during all of this.
Well, especially up to this point, hasn't shown particularly much interest in the opposite sex.
No, I think it was very much a this is what I'm supposed to be doing thing. And if I marry a lady, people would pay less attention to me when it comes to boys.
That's very true. And because, by all accounts, this was a marriage that his mother had arranged for him. And this poor, unlucky woman had 6 children with him.
It probably wouldn't surprise any of you that Albert Fish was not winning any Dad of the Year awards with these kids. They would later recall that he would sometimes ask them to play games with him that usually involved them paddling him until he bled. They also witnessed him pushing needles into his skin for enjoyment.
Yay, nothing traumatic like that happening.
I looked so hard to see what became of these kids.
I hope they are doing okay.
Well, they're probably all dead now, but yeah.
I hope they were doing okay up until that point. Oh, this is during a time where, unfortunately, it was pretty common to beat your kids. We've talked about this many times before. Albert had a paddle that he would keep on the wall that had nails in it. But rather than use it on his kids, as one might expect for the era, he would get them to use it on him. And I will note, quite often, his bare behind.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Like, what?
When we say it's gross, it's gross.
It's so weird.
It's really bizarre. I mean, this is someone, he as a human being makes no sense to me.
Absolutely not. When I say perverse and depraved,
Yes.
I really mean it because it's so twisted. Like I said, the things he did to himself, and I will say, by most accounts, his kids say he never really attacked them.
Yes, that's right.
But he did have them participate in certain things, which is still not okay. He was up to a whole bunch of strange things around that time, and Albert was still definitely spending his time in the company of men. On one occasion, he recounted one of his boyfriends taking him to a wax museum. During that time, he saw the bisection of a penis, which he would later say caused him to develop a sexual fascination with castration.
In 1903, Albert was arrested for larceny and he spent some time in the infamous Sing Sing prison.
And this would be the same prison where he'd be later executed. And this was the home of the famous electric chair, Old Sparky. This stint in prison didn't really seem to last long and had absolutely no effect on his criminality. Once he got out, he was right back to his old games.
Albert visited numerous brothels where he would pay people to whip and beat him regularly.
And we don't just mean like a little bit.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Albert Fish enjoyed sheer brutality. He both loved inflicting it, but also loved having it inflicted on himself.
His first, what we would consider major attack, happened in 1910. We do know that he was obviously assaulting numerous children prior to this, but this is where we start to see a huge escalation in his behavior and his depravity.
Albert was working in Delaware and met a 19-year-old named Thomas Bedden. The two began a relationship, and it very quickly escalated into sadomasochistic behavior. We don't know a whole lot about Thomas, but we do know that he was a young man with special needs.
It's very likely that he was coerced into this.
One day, Albert convinced him to accompany him to an old farmhouse where he kept him for 2 weeks. During that time, Thomas was severely tortured. At one point, Albert cut off half of Thomas's penis.
So I watched a few documentaries about this. I listened to a couple podcasts, and there are some sources where they say it was a very two-sided thing where they basically had like a 2-week long orgy where this kid ended up with half of his penis missing. I don't believe that. I think maybe there was some persuasion at the beginning and it was fun and games, and then all of a sudden he was kept for 2 weeks.
I think, yes, I completely agree. It would have all been fine and dandy, and perhaps, I mean, I'm not going to say consensual because, as we've just discussed, Thomas did have special needs and was clearly coerced. But I'm sure there came a point where Thomas realized pretty quickly, oh, this isn't fun anymore.
Something is very wrong
Something
here.
is very wrong.
And Albert, of course, didn't let him leave. Now, if you know about Albert Fish, you've probably heard some of his horrifically messed up quotes that he's now famous for. So we're going to give you one right here, right now, in regards to how he felt about the whole situation. He said,
I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me.
and we want to clarify, when he said this, it wasn't in the tone of someone who was haunted by his actions. He loved everything about this.
Albert fully admits that he had originally intended to kill Thomas, cut up his body, and bring it home with him. However, he worried that he would attract too much attention and chose not to.
We know that obviously later on he'd go on to cannibalize people, but I wonder if this was the first time that he seriously considered it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, yes, it was unsuccessful, but I honestly think if he wanted to take the body with him, maybe it was to hide it, I don't know, but knowing what we know about him now, it's possible that he fully intended to eat Thomas.
I'd believe it. He poured hydrogen peroxide over the wound, wrapped it up, gave Thomas $10 and a kiss goodbye. He never saw him again.
And apparently he had no interest in ever seeing him again after that either. He was like, I'm done.
He got what he wanted from the situation, and he was like, okay, peace out.
Yeah.
Good luck with your half a penis.
Yeah, exactly. In January of 1917, his wife left him for another man.
I'm not shocked by this.
Go on, girl. Like, get out of there. Honestly, good for her. I wonder how much she knew about the kind of things that he was up to, but judging by the things he was doing just in their own home, I feel like she probably had a feeling and was like, I need to get out of here.
And she left him with the 6 kids as well.
Yes.
She did not take them with her. She was like, see you later. So at one point, Albert actually went and told a newspaper about everything that had happened. He basically complained to them, saying that she left him, she took everything he owned, and that he was stuck raising the kids without her.
It's like the old-timey equivalent to a guy getting broken up with and posting about it on Facebook.
Yeah, absolutely. He clearly didn't really have anyone else in his life that he could sit down over a glass of whiskey and,
No.
commiserate over, oh, the wife left me with the kids. He had to write to the newspaper and be like, that bitch left me.
Yeah. Oh, and I bet you it was like a truly heartbreaking account on his
I'm
end.
sure it was. And you know what? I feel truly sorry for the children in this situation. I don't think I agree with her leaving them.
No.
However, I can't put myself in her place.
Oh, goodness, no.
And clearly she did what she thought was best for her at the time.
It was around this time that his mental health began to deteriorate even further. He claimed that it was then that he began experiencing auditory hallucinations.
And listeners, this is when he started shoving sewing needles into his groin.
Which would become, next to eating pee pee and poo poo, one of his favorite hobbies.
That's the x-rays we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of needles, guys. It's not just like
It's so many
one
needles.
or two. This man is riddled with them all up in his groin.
He is a human pincushion.
Literally. Unfortunately, we will be discussing that a lot more as the story continues.
And I think at this point, you're not going to want to eat after this episode, you guys. I'm going to tell you that right now.
I'm going to tell you right now, I'm kind of glad I had my dinner already.
Yeah. However, I have a little surprise for you.
Oh, another surprise.
It's the Bosnian in me. I just like surprising you with food.
Hey, I'm never going to complain about that. I'm not a woman that likes a lot of surprises, but you can surprise me with food. That's
right?
fine.
That's the best kind of surprise.
Although last time you surprised me with food, it was fucking pickled fish.
That is true. It's a little bit better this time, I feel like. So we are going to cut here for those of you listening everywhere else. If you're listening on Patreon, you're going to get to watch this. So here's some incentive, baby.
Yeah, this is going to give me the energy I need to get through the rest of this episode.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, if you are on Patreon, thank you for watching.
Appreciate
and
it.
If you're anywhere else, welcome back. We're about to continue with the horror story.
Yes, so back to Albert Fish. He claimed that during this time, he would also put some wool up his butt, douse it with lighter fluid, and then set it on fire. We're coming back strong.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I'd like to forget about it again.
I sure would too. Here's the thing.
Okay.
And you kind of mentioned this before.
Mhm.
If he was doing all of this and just doing it to himself,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be the end of the world.
No, I know kinks can be very specific things for very specific people.
Yeah.
As long as everyone is consenting, of age,
Mhm.
and of sound mind.
Yeah, and we got none of that here.
There's none of that happening. There is none of that happening.
Unfortunately, the only thing Albert Fish loved more than causing pain onto himself was hurting other people against their will.
Yeah. In 1919, he stabbed a young boy. However, it doesn't seem like the child was killed. He would later say that oftentimes he would find other kids and pay them money to bring him victims.
The John Wayne Gacy method.
I deeply hate that.
It was around this time that Albert Fish started carrying around what he would call his implements of hell. This often included a butcher knife, meat cleaver, and a hacksaw.
Yeah, implements of hell is apt.
It sounds right, yeah. One of the things I really noticed with Albert Fish is with a lot of serial killers, you see them slowly escalate and build up towards their crimes. And while he still does do what I consider escalation,
Mhm.
he starts off committing horrific crimes right off the bat. And I truly believe during this time, he was killing kids. I really do.
I am sure he was.
And because of the kind of victims that he chose, he didn't get caught. I am guessing that a lot of kids probably went missing around this time and they were either never reported as gone or they were reported and no one cared to investigate.
We've talked about it with certain victim demographics before where
Yeah.
they're almost considered less dead
Yes.
when they go missing because of their race or the fact that they are intellectually disabled or they're from the wrong neighborhood and police just don't give a shit as much.
On July 11th, 1924, Albert Fish found an 8-year-old girl named Beatrice playing alone on her parents' farm. He began chatting with her and offered her some money if she were to help him look for rhubarb in the fields nearby.
Little Beatrice happily obliged and began to leave the farm with Albert. by some miracle, her mother caught them just in time and chased him away. He returned later that night and was discovered by her father while he was trying to sleep in their barn.
He would say he truly believed that the reason he was so interested in torturing and harming kids was because he felt that God was commanding him to do so.
Oh, sure. Blame it on God.
Right, like, buddy, I don't think God's talking to you. And if he was, I don't think he's going to say that.
No. At some point, some of you are probably asking yourselves how he was able to get so many young people to trust him. We're going to talk about this more next week when we discuss some of his murder victims, but we'll touch on it briefly right now because it's a very valid thing to think of.
One of the things to note about Albert Fish was that overall, he was not an intimidating looking guy. He portrayed himself as someone who was very meek and friendly and just wanted to help you out. He wasn't poor by any means, so he was able to bribe children to go along with what he wanted by offering them food or toys and things like that. And because of that, he appeared as a very trustworthy person. It reminds me of Luis Garavito.
Yes, I actually have been thinking of him most of the time so far. His victims wouldn't find out who he was truly until it was too late.
That's something that is so terrifying about him to me because he would portray himself as this calm and friendly man, and everything would seem fine until that moment when it absolutely wasn't. And by the time they realized who Albert Fish was and what he was capable of, a lot of the time they weren't able to get away.
Well, and we will discuss it next week, but the damage that he did to his victims, when police and investigators were trying to figure it out, they were saying someone who did this had to have been a strong young man.
Yes.
Which automatically crossed Albert off the list because he was a small, scrawny looking old fella.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why he was able to carry on as long as he did. All of this brings us to May 25th, 1928. At this time, Albert Fish was 58 years old. He found a classified ad in the Sunday edition of the New York World that was written by an 18-year-old named Edward Budd. It read,
"Young man, 18, wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street."
Edward was a young man who was simply just trying to get a job so that he could help his family get by. Albert visited the farm under the guise of hiring Edward. He told him that his name was Frank Howard and that he was a successful farmer who came from the town of Farmingdale.
He came by with his top hat. I know a lot of time they talk about him coming by, and I think of H.H. Holmes a lot in this,
Very
right?
much so.
Yeah.
Same era for
Oh,
sure.
same vibe too of this
Yes.
man in a suit, and he says he's successful, he's well spoken, he's not quite what they're used to, but yeah,
He rizzed people up, basically.
he sure did. Albert later admitted that he fully intended on murdering Edward Budd. His plan was to get him alone, tie him up, and mutilate him. He agreed that he would hire Edward as well as a friend of his and that he would come back in a few days to get them.
He didn't show up, but he did send them a telegram saying that unfortunately something had come up and he would come back to them at a later date.
When he returned, he was introduced to Edward's 10-year-old sister, Grace. It was then that he changed his mind about killing Edward and set his sights on his little sister.
And that is where we will pick up again next week.
Oh,
I'm not looking forward to it because I know what happens.
Honestly, I love researching, I love writing, but there's so many of these stories that we cover that are just, I like getting the story out because I think it's worth talking about. I think this kind of level of human being, the fact that he even existed is unreal.
Such a glitch in the Matrix for someone like this to exist. And I know, we've talked about Pee-wee Gaskins, again, little shithead of a monster.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about, oh my God, me and these fucking names. I'm turning more into my father every goddamn day, regardless of his traumatic energy. Who are we just talking about?
Charles Manson.
No. God damn it.
Who we guess? Luis Garavito.
Luis Garavito. Again, very similar calibers of serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
Same kind of old-timey vibe. I guess less so for Luis. But nonetheless, just that level of depravity, and you're looking to create victims out of the most vulnerable in our society.
Yeah.
And instinctually, as a human being, you shouldn't even be able to bring yourself to hurt a child.
Of course
You
not.
you
Yeah.
just, it should not even occur to you to do that. And then for him to do the things he did, and like you say, yes, there was escalation, but he kind of flew right out of the gates with the awful shit.
I don't ever like to think, I don't believe that someone can be born evil. I really don't. But I think this is as close to that as you can get.
It's mind-boggling, to be honest.
I wish that we knew, again, this happened so long ago that the records, they just simply aren't there.
Mhm.
And I was able to find his family tree.
Okay.
And it was like his parents and then their parents and even before that. So it was a
Mhm.
few generations before that. So I found their names and their dates of birth and death, but I couldn't find any information about them because I was curious to know. We know that mental health was an issue in this family,
Mhm.
but what happened to his siblings? What were they like? What was
Yeah.
his mother like? You know what I mean? I mean, there's so many missing pieces of the puzzle there that we just don't really know because of how long ago this was. But is this a one-off in a family, or were they all a little bit like this?
It makes you wonder, and the problem being is, like you said, it was so long ago, and even for us in modern times, 2 generations back is pretty much all you know off the top of your head for family
Oh
history.
yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
I can say I don't know a whole lot about my great-great-grandparents.
Mhm.
I would have to do some digging to even find their names. And that's in modern times where I'm still lucky enough that we have like photographs and stuff of them,
Yes.
black and white, obviously. But in this time period, 3 generations back for Albert, you're talking almost the
It
1700s.
was, yeah. The earliest date that I could find of someone being born was 1735. Yeah.
Exactly. And so in that case, America was a baby country
Yeah.
as we know it at that point. And so, as with most of these old-timey, like Western frontier kind of stories,
Mhm.
people just died and went missing, and that was kind of it.
And a lot of them, while they were alive, they were so transient. Like they would go from one
Yes.
city to another, and you could simply go from like your state to the next state and live an entirely different life as this new, like
Yes.
undiscovered human being with a fresh identity.
Well, if you think about it, all while this is happening in, New York and stuff for Albert, in Europe and in the UK, this is the Victorian era.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it's kind of hard in my mind, I'm always kind of mind blown that, like, the Western, like, old-timey Red Dead Redemption is happening at the same time that Queen Victoria is alive. The
That's
2
so
don't the
true.
2 don't
Yeah.
coincide in my mind, but they were absolutely happening at the same time.
This is personally for me one of my favorite periods of time to talk about from a true
Yes.
crime standpoint because it's we see a lot of similarities to people. I mean, again, you compared Albert Fish to Luis Garavito. We've
Mhm.
done that, but you see the differences in how much more they were able to get away with just because of how different life was back then.
100%. They could move to a different state, change their name, and that was it.
No one would
You're a
question
whole
it
new person,
because you're not
so
going to go to the next state and be like, "Hey, who is this guy? Do you know him?"
exactly. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't wanna say I hope you guys enjoyed this.
You're going to hate this series, but I hope you love it at the same time.
I hope you found it interesting. I
Yes.
hope maybe you're learning some new things today. You're probably learning some new things about, needles and genitalia. Sorry about that.
Yeah. It's
Can't
what we're here for.
Unfortunately, I promise you it is not getting better,
No.
but we hope you will join us next week for part 2 nonetheless.
Part 2 is gonna be rough. I kind of thought about it and I'm like, do we read the letter? Do we not read the letter?
Mm.
It's rough, but we're gonna read the letter.
I think it's important to,
I think so too.
especially since it's the words from the man himself, and we don't always get that.
No, we don't.
I mean, with Charles Manson, we did because that man would not shut the fuck up.
Nope.
But it's interesting to hear it from Albert Fish's point of view. I will say that.
And I do enjoy covering stories that people ask us to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we want you guys to enjoy what you're listening to as well. And if there are people or cases or
Mhm.
cryptids or horror stories that you want us to cover, by all means, please let us know. It could be something new for us as
Yeah.
well, which I'm always here for. And it could be something that we're already very much aware of because I like sharing knowledge with you guys too. So
Yeah, and sometimes it's on the list. Like with Albert Fish, he was on the list. We just kind of like bump him up when we know other people want to
yeah,
hear it.
absolutely, absolutely. We've talked about it before. We usually plan our episodes like 5 topics in advance,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And sometimes there'll be one episode, sometimes there'll be a couple, like this guy. But if there is something you guys are mega interested in, we're happy to bump things up the priority list for
Yeah,
sure.
and we are going to be working on our new list of episodes probably like next week. We're already there.
Yeah,
I
that
feel like
time
we just did that.
time has flown. We finished Charles Manson, obviously, and then we lined up the ones that we've done recently. So yeah, it'll be time to visit the lists, check the social medias, see what you guys want to hear, and yeah,
Let us know. thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com or comment on the
comment
socials.
in all the places. We see them.
You know how to get a hold of us.
Absolutely.
All right. So, friendly reminder, we have a Patreon. It's super fun. There are perks for free members. You can find out who we're covering ahead of time before anybody else by just subscribing for free. Patreon.com/thegrimcurriculum. Or if you're feeling generous, you can sign up for the Patreon and get all sorts of fabulous content, including all other tiers. Get this, video versions of the episodes, and all of that money that we make goes towards improving the podcast. We are currently saving up for some new mics. So, yeah, check it out.
Yeah, I've done some research. We've picked out what we think we want, and we're just saving our pennies.
Yeah.
And that's all possible thanks to you guys on Patreon. So,
which is amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you're listening on Spotify, give us a 5-star rating. If you're watching on YouTube, throw a like or a comment our way. All that little stuff. I know it sounds so cheesy when I say it, but it really, really does help us, and we definitely appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Hitting like or hitting subscribe does not cost you a dang thing except the 1 second it takes to do it.
Yeah, so why aren't you doing it?
Yeah.
All right. I want to say a huge thank you to our Grim VIPs on Patreon.
Of course.
Thank you so much to Lisa, Mayhem Mudkip, Kevinus Musicus, Steven Centauri, Bob, Hillary, Brian, Judy, and Atlantean Jedi.
Thank you so much, you guys. You guys are the true ones. You've been there since pretty much the beginning, a lot of you, and we appreciate the heck out of you guys.
I was talking to my mom about this. We are at about 140 episodes in total right now.
Whoa! My God, time is flying. We talked about this just before.
Yeah.
But it seems like, I mean, the older you get, obviously, the faster time seems to fly. That's just...
Don't love that.
Life. But whoa, 140 episodes already. That's crazy. And I was also saying just before, we have 30 episodes of extra credit now, too, which is wild.
We have so much fun with extra credit. Honestly, if you aren't listening to it, definitely give it a chance. Check it out. It's different than this show, but it's a lot of fun.
It is. I enjoy it very much. Well, I enjoy it all.
Yeah.
And we hope you guys enjoyed it too. So that all being said, thank you so much for listening. This has been the Grim Curriculum. I have a topical fact for us today. You're not going to like it. It's related to the episode. And I'm sorry to all of you out there listening who have a pair of your own testicles. So you guys have probably heard that to bite through a human finger, it takes approximately the same amount of force as biting through a carrot. But did you know, in order to rip open a scrotum, it takes about the same amount of force to open a chip bag?
I hate that so much.
And I know all the testicle owners in our audience just went,
You're clenching. Oh, I hate it.
Sorry, guys.
Bye.